Well, Yemi Adamolekun joins us now. She is the Executive Director, Enough is Enough, and they've been on this matter. Well, good to have you join us this morning.
Thank you.
Well, there's been a series of protests and still ongoing. Are we making any headway?
Yes, attention and awareness. I think just as a starter, one thing I'd like to start with is just saying that this is really not just about the Chibok girls. Almost a year ago to date that the abduction happened was the Baga crisis in northern Borno. And the report that the National Human Rights Commission released in June of last year talked about abductions. Excuse me. Abductions from farms, abductions of women from their farms so people stopped farming, abductions of women from fishing, the fish markets, because that was mostly run by women, and women stopped going to the markets as well. February of this year, you guys remember, Buni Yadi in Yobe, Federal Government College,
where the
boys were murdered. The report said 20 girls were also abducted. We haven't heard anything about it. Now, the number for the Chibok girls has raised this level of international awareness, but I really don't want people to forget that the pattern of abduction is not new, and the pattern of silence is not new.
So if we look at all of this now, we may well be looking for almost 500,000 women and girls.
Well, the numbers, I think, for me, will be staggering. I really don't want to speculate. But if we look at the period that Boko Haram has been operating in the northeast, and what that speaks to how we account for human lives in this country. I mean, every report that we hear from all sorts of things, from Benue to the northern part, you hear 23 dead, 24 dead, 35 dead. Hardly do we hear names, numbers, stories. They're just numbers. And because of that, it's very easy to lose track. Because once you say 20 people are gone, you don't have their names, you don't have their identities, you don't have their stories, that's it. And we move on to the next one. So there really is a fundamental issue with the way we respect lives in this country. And that affects how we investigate atrocities, how we document them, and how we then deal with the victims. I mean, if a parent cannot come to a government agency and say, my child is missing, what government agency do we even have that documents these things? Who in any state in this country can produce a list of these are the people that we've been reported have either been abducted or missing or died in all of these insurgencies?
So you
I dare to say none.
Documentation is very important
Critical.
here. Because I had a talk with you over the weekend, and the talk has to be with documentation.
Yeah.
And till this moment, what can we do to actually make government and agencies involved, especially in this particular matter, give the world a list of these people, young Nigerians we're searching for?
I think for the particular case of Chibok, it would really have to be the Borno state government, to be honest. It's a government school. So it's under the purview of the state government. So between the state government, the Commissioner for Education for the state, the principal of the state, and the parents of the missing kids, there should be, and then WAEC, now that we added WAEC since they were registered for exam, there should be a way to have a comprehensive list of who was in school, who was abducted, who has come back. Now, a lot of things that we've heard following that makes it very, very difficult. And people said, oh, why haven't the parents come forward? Where are they? But we can't take away the context out of it. It's like when we blame rape victims for not coming forward to report. This is a culture of silence because this has continued to happen. So you've missed a child. And so people, for example, part of the confusion I'll dare say is the people whose child might have been missing in a prior abduction who then came forward this time because suddenly some people seem to be interested in missing children. But if you have a culture where people are not encouraged to come and report, or you don't feel that you can trust a government agency, why would you then blame parents for not coming forward? If people are afraid that they might be persecuted, I mean, if you follow the reports, a lot of parents are even afraid to come forward to appear on TV or to appear talking to news agencies, either they blur their faces or they're speaking to talk about what they're going through because of fear. How do we then blame them when the government who's meant to give them assurance that don't worry, you'll be fine?
If I get you,
Yeah.
You say the list would have helped us in a system where we have the culture of silence,
Yeah.
stigma,
Yes.
and fear.
And fear, yeah. And it's because it's not the first time, and I keep wanting to refer, so people don't forget that we're shouting about Chibok girls. Yes, it is a huge number, but I hope that helps us spotlight what has become a pattern over time, and complicitly in all three tiers of government in not making this public and not documenting this incidents.
Sorry, Chair Nyota, yes, we are protesting, or there are protests, going around, but what about the levels of engagement? Because what you have are critical questions to ask in terms of numbers and hard facts of what do we know about this. Have you been able to engage any government agency, or what has been the response to the protests that you've been having?
The first one from Abuja was to the National Assembly, elected representatives of the Nigerian people, and the Senate President and the Speaker did come out, and they said they were going to have a meeting with the President that night. And one of the requests was to have daily briefings on what their findings are. That hasn't happened. That was followed by a meeting with the National Security Advisor's Office, which was then followed by a meeting to the Chief of Defense Staff. So there have been a series of meetings with specific requests, and one that keeps coming back is provide information about what it is that you're doing. The challenge that is that, quite frankly, is that National Security Advisors are not elected by the Nigerian people. They're officials of government, but they're not people in the sense that we have a direct stake on. Neither is the Chief of Defense Staff. But they were quite gracious in having meetings and providing information on what it is that they're doing.
What did you find out from those meetings?
What we found out from the meetings were, I guess, an understanding of challenges, an understanding of communication patterns that haven't worked out well. So our next point, a meeting on Tuesday, tomorrow, will be with the Borno State government to sort of hear their side of the story. So the federal government and the security agencies have said their side of the story. And then the next step with the Borno State government.
Does it bother you that we're getting sides of a story?
Yeah, it does.
Because, I mean, one would think that by now what we should have is one reconciled, one single story from all levels of government.
Exactly.
You know, and even the security agencies involved.
Completely agree. And that is part of the challenge. But we wanted to make sure that we, in a sense, did our part and said, you know what, instead of just saying rah, 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 let's take the time to actually engage these government agencies so we're clear about what it is that they're saying. By the time we do Borno tomorrow, and then we're able to say, look, this is what all these three agencies have told us, can the federal government then sort of harness all of this and say, this is exactly what we're doing? And that is the challenge. As Mrs. Owen was saying, there's a lot of finger pointing, and that's where there's room for the First Lady, even though she meant well, to be able to have a meeting in front of cameras that ended up causing probably a lot more harm than good. She might have meant well, but the fact that it was a public meeting, and I think you asked the question, should it not have been better off through security agencies? Yes, it could have been behind the closed door meetings. Security agencies, as a First Lady of the nation, I'm really concerned about what's going on. How do we get involved? What can we do? But because it was done on air and sort of almost people felt ridiculed, I guess I would say, was the sentiment. The Borno First Lady said she didn't want to come because that's what she felt she would be. That sort of ended up doing more harm than good. But yes, there is a fundamental problem with that. Even if you listen to the words from either the Minister of Information, the SSA, Mr. Okupe, there's also discordant tones in there of what exactly the government is doing. But I think what is clear to us is that all of this is also a reaction to citizens' action and international action. One thing we are very certain of is that if citizens are not speaking, if the international community has not put pressure, most likely this would also be silent.
Just a moment again. I know that I think I may just have answered that question, but I'm a little curious to find out what you found out from the NSA and also from the Chief of Defense Staff.
How do I phrase this? Challenges within the military in terms of resources that they have, I would say. Their challenges in communicating with the Borno State government, which is why I said the next step would be to speak to the Borno State government. Borno is under a state of emergency, which, as far as I understand, means the federal government is really, in a sense, controlling.
Did it say that they have challenges communicating with the Borno State government?
Maybe communicating is not the right choice of words, but in sort of getting information, maybe that's the word. Information sharing, that's the best way to phrase it. Information sharing with the Borno State government, and that's the issue we raised earlier in terms of numbers. Like, okay, who's responsible for providing numbers? Who's responsible for establishing what happened? Teachers were in school, no lights. I mean, so the issues surrounding why the kids were in school under those circumstances fall under the purview of the Borno State government. So I think in terms of finding out, and I think for me, I'd like to distinguish this two ways. In terms of investigations around finding out what happened, that we got here, is one thing. Now, what are we doing to actually find the children is another thing. And in terms of what are we doing to find the children, there are a lot of promises from our perspective that have not been materialized. There was a report, for example, yesterday, they've increased security presence in Chibok. But from the family members who live there, from a journalist who went there, they're saying that that's not true. That you see a lot of checkpoints leading up to Chibok. But once you get there, it's not that you feel any particularly increase. So what does that say about what is being, information that's being shared and the reality on ground?
The families who live there, you mean speaking to the families of the girls?
Yes.
How many of them have you spoken to?
I've spoken to two, but I personally have spoken to two.
Have you seen any of their pictures, any of the girls' pictures?
No, well, not from them, but I've seen one that was shown online, on news footage, news footage.